When someone sent me this video, I was honestly just a little bit surprised of someone taking off into a thunderstorm, but then it became clear just how irresponsible this pilot is. And I don't use that word irresponsible lightly because people make mistakes, myself included. I've made plenty. But being in a thunderstorm, you can sometimes get yourself into a bit of a trap. It has happened to me, but this is a little bit of a different situation with this video. You can see that they're taking off and the flashes are happening right here at the airport. Now this can be tricky because this is filmed on a GoPro or something like a GoPro, so judging distance is a little bit tricky. And I'm not there in this situation. There have been flights that I've been in, flying in thunderstorms just recently, that if you were in the back, you would think Kelsey has lost his mind. What is he taking me into? So sometimes you get yourself worked up into a corner and you don't really have a lot of options. That's not really the case with this video and what these pilots are doing, but that's not even what annoys me. I'm going to explain to you what annoys me the most later on, but first let's check out this video.
Set takeoff thrust and 1 toga.
Now, I don't know the procedure of this airline, so I'm not going to get into any of the small features or opinions on his flying or flying style or whatever. I wouldn't want someone criticizing some of that stuff about me. So that's not really the point here that I want to make. But you may have noticed here that there's lightning going off directly in front of the plane before they even start their takeoff roll. But something else that caught my eye was the radar. It's on, but it's not painting anything. Now our radars can scan left and right, and they always are scanning left and right, but they can also scan up and down. So we're able to tilt them up or tilt them down because if you're climbing, you want to see the weather above you, or if you're descending, you want to see the weather below you. So we're able to change those pitches while it's scanning left and right. Now, I don't know at this stage, is the pilot not have his radar on at all, which is possible, or are they pointing it at a different angle, or is it broken? I don't really know at this point. But with having lightning going on, there's probably some type of precip out there. And before we take off, typically in any type of weather situation, we push this button here, and what that does is it allows for this main screen to show bad weather in front of me. An alternative option for that screen is to put terrain up there, which basically will put just big blocks of terrain that's up in front of you. Now, that's not an either or. Basically what it means is that if you're flying in a really mountainous area, sometimes you'll have one guy on radar and one guy on terrain. It's up to you. If you don't have terrain up though, and you both have radar up because the weather is bad, like in this situation, if you both have weather up and you do start flying directly into a mountain, that doesn't mean that you're not going to see it. It's still going to override because at the end of the day, your plane's going to do better going through a storm than it is going through a mountain. But usually one will have one will have the other, just so you know in advance for situational awareness. But in a case like this, where there's a thunderstorm, you might both be on weather because as you approach a mountain, let's just say, it's going to switch from weather to terrain, just so you know. But those are the options. When I see nothing here on the screen, at first it's strange, but then you'll notice as he rotates, all of a sudden, a bunch of weather starts forming on a screen, which leads me to believe that he probably had his radar set to go directly straight, like 0 or maybe up 1, but not up enough to know what is out in front of them before they rotate and take off flying into the weather. So he's probably got it at a very shallow pitch up, which is strange if you're taking off into a thunderstorm. Still not a big deal. I've seen people do that. I've also seen planes get onto the runway, stop here, give it 10 or 15 seconds, and let their radar do a full sweep pointing upwards so that way they can see exactly what's in front of them and how far out it is. Which is typically what I do if I'm taking off and there's any type of question of what type of weather we're going to be getting into. I want to know, what is my screen saying? Air traffic control is going to have their radar, but there's been times in my life, the one I was recently even, where air traffic control walked me into a really bad corner with a bunch of weather and I didn't have any choices. So I typically like to listen to them, and there are places that are better than others, like Miami, great with weather, thunderstorms and stuff, really good. Probably not great with getting you around mountains. So every airport and every area has great things where they're really strong at and really weak at. But I always like to trust but verify. I'm just not a trusting person. So I'll get onto the runway, let my radar do a full sweep of that area, and then we take off. And if it's all red, it's like a great wall of red out there, then I'm not going to do it. There was a case when I was a new FO, I told a story about it, but we got onto the runway. There was a bunch of thunder showers towards the end of the runway, and I don't think there was lightning, but there was a lot of thunder. There were some showers there, some really heavy rain, and I said, I'm not really comfortable with this. I don't want to take off. And the captain's like, cool, let's go. And we got off the runway. We waited 5 minutes. That storm passed. We took off and flew, and it wasn't a big issue. That was my buddy PJ. You've heard me talk about him back in the day. That was me and PJ flying. He was like, no big deal. He said while we were waiting at the end of the runway, he was like, I'm comfortable with that. And I have a lot more flying experience. He had thousands of hours that time, and I had hundreds. So he goes, I felt fine with it, but if you're not comfortable with it, no big deal. 5 minutes isn't going to make us or break us. So that just shows how great PJ was. But getting back to this guy here, my guess is that this pilot has his radar turned probably too low, so they don't have any idea of exactly what's out there because his radar is scanning straight ahead instead of up enough. Watch what happens next.
Check. Enough speed. Intervention 200. Cavolo.
Now, once you're up in the air, there's really not much you can do about it. When you're on the ground and you're looking up, you can go, okay, cool, I don't want to take off into that. Once you're in the air, there's really not much option. You're just going to have to pick around that storm the best you can. You're going to have to use your weather radar, what you can see outside, your aviation experience and your weather experience and what the winds are telling you, and just do your best to get around that storm. That's really all you can do once you're at this stage, you're airborne, and okay, let's just get around it. Years ago, I made a video on this video flight, and I talked about how a pilot wouldn't intentionally take off into the storm because it would be stupid and unsafe. And I still feel that way. You can see once this plane rotated off the ground, the pitch angle, you could see what the radar was painting in front of them, and it was showing like it was pretty close to the front of the plane. I can't quite see the distance, but it's pretty close out there. You see here how it's showing this painting of the cells, the yellow and the red. That indicates that there's some weather very close to the aircraft that you're not going to want to be flying into. Now, it appears they are staying below the clouds, which is great, but you can kind of tell how rough this ride is just by how much the pilot is controlling his yoke. The other thing that I want to tell you, if you're planning on being a pilot, that I don't like when people do this, and I don't think it's really the safest course of action, is this pilot is choosing to hand fly, which is fine under some circumstances. Hand flying means that the pilot who's flying is just doing that. He's just flying and giving instructions, and you can hear him saying things to the other pilot that he has to now do. That pilot has to do those things while talking to air traffic control, while looking at the weather radar, while the pilot flying is just like in his own little world of flying. That's all that he has to do, is be responsible for something that's really key in the whole thing, flying the plane. But what it does is it can load up the other pilot. The other pilot seems like he's handling it fine. I'm not saying that he's overloaded, but it does adds an extra amount of work for them instead of them both being able to monitor and see what's going on. What I typically would do and would want somebody to do if I'm in the other pilot's shoes is, let's turn the autopilot on, let's both look at the weather radar, let's be able to talk about that while the autopilot is flying. So it's kind of like having a third person there helping you. We can be discussing about the weather instead of you telling me the things that you want me to touch on the control panel. That's called the MCP. Instead of you telling me those things that you want me to do, we can be discussing, hey, how are we going to get around the storm and how are we going to handle this problem? But instead, he's choosing to hand fly, and the reaction that a pilot is going to have in order to keep the plane wings level or pitched up or whatever it is that you're supposed to be doing phase of flight wise, the autopilot is going to be able to do that much faster than any human, because it's going to be able to recognize and make those corrections faster than you as a human are going to read it, see it, have the flight director tell you what to do, and then you react. It's just not going to be as fast. And that becomes relevant if things start to go downhill, which I'll explain in a second. The problem with flying in this type of weather is that you have something known as a microburst. This is what a microburst looks like. It's basically a very powerful downforce of air that can press your plane straight into the ground if you don't properly respond to it. I've met people who have crashed, airline pilots that have crashed because of a microburst. There have been accidents that have happened. Dallas is probably the most famous one that happened as a result of a microburst. It's basically a really strong force of downward pressure of wind that's going to just force the plane onto the ground if you don't properly react to it. Now, planes have, like now, wind shear alerts and all kinds of different things to help the plane not have a repeat accident of what happened to the Delta plane. And I've talked to this airline pilot. He came in at my first airline and talked to us about a microburst, wind shear, and how dangerous it is, because pilots sometimes are thinking, oh, I'm going to fly my way out of this. And it's just not that easy. The reality is like Mother Nature, if she wants to win, she's going to win. So you have to use every advantage that you can. So if you have a microburst, we get a lot of training of how to fly out of it. But guess what? A plane is going to fly out of it probably better than you are as a human monitoring everything that's going on. Because if you're in this situation where you're hand flying and now you have a wind shear and now the plane is going to start going down, it's going to take you longer to react, to be able to get the autopilot turned on and get away from the ground at a max power setting. And as you can imagine, microbursts are usually around thunderstorms like that. So I choose always in that type of a situation on the side of safety, let's turn on the autopilot, because if we do hit a situation where there is a microburst, I want to have the autopilot on, hooked up, and jam that thing and let's go up as fast as we possibly can away from that, or use max power so we're getting away from the ground. Because if you hit a real microburst, you as a human aren't going to react as fast to stay away from the ground. It is going to be shoving you to the ground very, very fast. I've done both in the simulator, so they want you to be able to do both, obviously. But the autopilot is going to do it better. And sometimes the autopilot can't handle it and it will kick it off. The autopilot just goes like, that's too much. That's outside of my limitation. Kick it off, and you have to be ready to grab it and fly it and do as good of a job as you can. And it's a hot mess. I mean, that plane is just getting slammed down. The shaker's going off. It's a very uncomfortable experience, especially when you're low to the ground like you just took off, and you're usually slower and heavier with fuel and all these other things. So it's not an ideal situation to be low to the ground, slow, hand flying near a thunderstorm, potentially near a microburst. It's just not a safe move in my opinion. So while I personally think it was a poor decision to take off into a thunderstorm like he is here, have it not tilted so he doesn't really know where he's going, and then choose to hand fly it into this storm like you see him doing, that wasn't even really what irritated me the most. It was actually his comments of what people were saying to him and what his reaction was to those comments that really started to irritate me the most. All of these things I don't think are great decisions. Obviously, the plane flew flying. Everybody got out of there. I'm sure there was a lot of people in the back that were very uncomfortable with the whole situation. You have to just trust that your pilots are going to make the best, safest move to help you get to where it is you want to go safely. That is the truth. And they obviously made it there fine, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was the safest course of action. But here's the thing. This guy is, I don't know, an influencer. He wants to be known or famous or wants attention, or he wants to educate people. I don't really know his intention. I haven't heard of him before, but he wants to post this online and have people see it. And the people had some things to say about it, and then here's his response. Now you can pause this video because these are going to go by kind of quickly, but these are some of the comments people left. Now they've been auto-translated on Instagram's auto-translate feature, and obviously that's not always a correct, proper translation. The problem is when pilots get on social media and publish videos like this, the everyday person, passenger that's riding on the plane might look and think, wow, look how good of the pilot this is. They're flying through the storm and they're getting out safely. Me, meanwhile, if I'm sitting on the back and that pilot takes off, I'm sitting in the back going like, why are we taking off into a thunderstorm? I mean, I know the plane can take it. I mean, these planes can take so much abuse. It's ridiculous how much abuse they can take. I have been just recently in a way worse storm than that, because I told you I got trapped into a corner, but I've been in way worse storms than that. So it's not that the plane can't take it. It can, but it's just not necessary. And if I'm sitting in the back as a passenger watching a pilot do this, I'm thinking like, what? No. Because I guarantee you, if you have this pilot doing this, the people in the back are stressing out. As you can see in the comments here, there are some people who are wondering why they didn't wait and do it a little bit later. Most of the time when you have like a red wall of death, which I have seen many times, especially when I was Miami based, usually you can wait 10, 15, 20 minutes. and it's moved out of the way, boom, and you're off to go. And will it cause some delays? Sure, it will cause some delays. But if you get microbursted into the ground, that's going to make you really late for your connecting flight. But the response on this one here is really what irritated me, because if I was a new pilot or a pilot in flight school reading this, I might think, oh wow, I just saw this guy do this, take off into a storm. I can take off to a storm, no big deal. I don't want to be the guy with small eggs. Now eggs in Spanish, which is what this guy was typing in, eggs basically mean balls. And you, as an airline pilot, you're not in the having balls category. You're in the flying as safe as possible and as boring as possible category. That's the zone that you're supposed to be in if you're an airline pilot. There should be no balls. This isn't all about balls. It's about making safe judgment and good judgment. So when I see a pilot say, oh, you got to have huevos, balls, what it's telling me is that you thought that there was some type of a risk factor in there, but you chose that I'm going to go do this anyways. And the problem that I have with that is that a new pilot who doesn't have this skill, who's maybe in a weaker plane, or maybe he's in flight school and he sees this thunderstorm and he goes like, I don't want to be the guy that doesn't have huevos, like here I'm going to just test this out, and then blast off into a lightning storm. There's a problem with that. That's not what you should be teaching. The people who have balls are the guys that are going and flying combat missions. The World War II pilots that are getting shot at all the time while they're flying and trying to drop bombs and missiles. That's when you need balls. Airline pilots, 0 balls needed. You just need good judgment. This, to me, is bad judgment, in my opinion, taking off into a thunderstorm, unless it was way further, very different from what it looked like in the video. But by him saying, oh, you just need huevos, that to me says it's a bad decision. Point blank. So while this guy has this video out here of him flying through the storm, I should probably tell you about mine. Basically, what happened that was different from this is we had taken off and there was some thunderstorms in the area, but quite a bit of ways, maybe 15, 20 miles away, and not really the direction we were taking off at. We climbed up and we were climbing out, and we got stuck because a whole bunch of traffic was coming in at like 12,000 feet, 13,000 feet, which you have a bunch of thunder showers. That's not really where you want to be at. Now you're right in the thunder showers. And we got trapped up. Air traffic control kind of let us slide to the left of the storm, and the storm now had kind of developed all the way on our right-hand side, and they wouldn't let us climb. And then I said, hey, I need to go further left. I wasn't the flying pilot. I was working the radios. I said, hey, we need to go further left. And they're like, can't go further left. I was like, well, we need to go up, and you can't go up. And I said, I was about to declare a pan and say, like, basically it's an emergency. I need to go left. And as I was getting ready to say that, and I said, I need another 20 left. He says, unable, North Korean airspace. It's the Trump card. Like, I didn't have a choice. We had this massive storm on the right and then North Korea airspace on the left, which didn't really show on some of the stuff that I put on the screen of where it was. It wasn't showing on there. But hey, that's I'm not trying to get shot down over a thunderstorm. So we had to basically just take a hard right 90, 100 degree turn and then get our wings level and blast through this. And it was significantly worse than what that guy went through. And it was very quiet on the flight deck. And it was probably moderate turbulence. And I was honestly worried we were going to hit a bunch of hail or something like that, and the whole front side of my plane was going to get destroyed. And then there would be this video, because in Recurrent every year at any airline, they go over things that pilots have done and mistakes that they made, so that way other people can learn from them. And I hit that thing, and I thought, here we go. There's going to be a video about Kelsey flying into a big red thunderstorm, because it was red, and it was just silent on that flight deck. And it was nighttime, just like this. The whole flight deck was lit up, and we picked our way the best that we could, and in part of that, we got permission to climb, and we hit climb, and we were doing like 500 feet a minute. Normally it'd be a few thousand feet a minute at that altitude. We were only hitting like 500 feet a minute. We were in this downdraft, not a microburst, which was going to really shove you down, but definitely a downdraft. The plane was having a hard time climbing because it was getting pressed down because of all the down that was coming down from this, from the storm that we were in. So I say that because that was a trap that I kind of got myself into, and with the assistance of air traffic control letting us slide to the left without telling us, hey, there's a big storm and it's going to go all the way into North Korean airspace, so you can't go in there. It is what it is. We got ourselves into a trap and we went. That was a mistake in some part on me, because I didn't have that overall situational awareness, even though I put the lines, and I think we could have got around it. And obviously I'm sure there's some buffer on air traffic control side. They don't want you even in the remote vicinity, and that's fine. I'll take no missile shoot down for me. But my point is you can get yourself into really bad weather with these planes, and they can take the abuse. That's not the issue. But encouraging people, especially pilots, or telling people, hey, I really press the limits, and blah blah blah, to fly a plane, an airline pilot? No, especially with people in the back. Now, I didn't have people on that flight. I do people flying and packs flying, and I do mostly boxes. But there was just freight back there. There was nobody back there. I would have felt terrible if I had people back there, because it was uncomfortable for us, and I was flying, and we were flying, so I knew exactly what was going on. I knew how long until we got out of the storm. I knew why we got into it. I knew all that stuff. If I was flying and I was flying people, they're not going to know that. They're going to be in the back looking out, seeing the whole plane light up, and they're going to be terrified. And so that would have been a bad situation, because I wouldn't have done anything different. When it comes down to safety, when I'm flying people or I'm flying boxes, it doesn't matter. I need to be as safe as possible, because I want to live. So I'm not going to fly harder into a storm because I'm like, oh, whatever, it's just boxes. That's not how I make my decisions. So I make the same decisions either way. I would have felt terrible about it. So I wouldn't have taken off into the storm, but taking off into the storm, if he feels that that's okay, that's fine. But by encouraging people to have balls, or when they're flying into a storm, that's promoting unsafe behavior. And that's why I think it's super irresponsible. That's just my opinion. You can have your own. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.